right. Good evening. I'll start by saying Salibonani, Linjani, Makadini, and I'll ask Vanawari say. It is a language of my mother's people, the Shona people of Southern African Zimbabwe. It is a question that asks, how are the children? This is how my mother used to ask our neighbors as I grew up every morning. Vanawari say, she would yell, how are the children? Growing up, I took this question lightly. But now as a mother of 3 11-year-old twins and a 14-year-old, and a childhood survivor who's still nursing herself from a 9-year-old traumatic event that happened to me as a child, the question of how are the children is something that is very dear to my heart. I ask this question to my nieces, to my neighbors, to the mothers who come through our program in Minnesota, in Zimbabwe, in the Gambia, in Zambia. Wherever our work is felt, I always ask, how are the children? Did you know that at least 1 in every 3 girls are violated sexually before they turn the age of 18? I believe this statistic is actually not accurate because the more I share my story, the more I share my book, the more I travel across the globe, more and more men have been coming to me after the discussion. And they talk about how they were violated as young boys. So to be inclusive, I want to also include and honor that young men are also violated. The statistics, however, are not as accurate as a lot of young boys are not encouraged to share their pain. This hidden pandemic of child sexual violence is very close to my heart because it has affected the way I be in the world. At age 18, with a small suitcase and a big dream, I left my home country of Zimbabwe. For those who have teenagers in the audience, you'd understand at that point the brain function is not quite there. So at 18, I thought I was going to conquer the world and run away from my parents and also the uncle who had violated me. It didn't matter what I did, I just wanted to be away from Zimbabwe. So of course, I chose the most northern part from the southern hemisphere, Minnesota, in February. Inappropriately dressed, I would show up to the College of St. Catherine, determined to pursue my education. What I didn't realize was I was carrying with me an invisible knapsack on my back. Childhood trauma. As years later, after I had my first son at 25, my therapist would tell me I was living as if I had a lion sitting on my lap. Let me tell you a story about lions. One of the most amazing interviews I gave was in the last 2 years. Her name is Tendai. She's a mother of 2, only 30. She was carrying her child in the most eastern region, north of Zimbabwe, which is very mountainous. Unbeknown to her, there was a lion that had escaped from the game reserve next to her village. She would face a lion attack. And one of my colleagues, a BBC journalist, asked me to interview her as a survivor. I did not realize how her story would impact my understanding of the invisible lion on my own lap and my understanding of healing trauma, learning from nature. My almost 2-hour interview with Tendai triggered a lot of pain on my part as a survivor of child sexual trauma, but it also helped me understand the ways of healing from understanding our ancestral knowledge, our African ways of thought, our ways of being. In her ordeal, she would share how she survived, or at least how she thought she survived the lion attack. You see, synchrony is an important thing to point out in this conversation, because about 2 months before the interview, I had just released and published my first book called Facing the Giants. I was talking about my own giants I had faced. Giants like experiencing the murder of Brother George Floyd, who I knew personally as a security guard at my favorite restaurant in Minneapolis, experiencing the racism as an African child coming from Africa and trying to understand the culture shock, where I didn't know I was Black at all until coming to Minnesota. I talked about a lot of giants in this book. So back to Tendai's story about the lion, I would ask her how she thought she faced the giant. Tendai would tell me about an ancestral wisdom that was passed from generation with her uncles and dads and great-grandfathers who were hunters. They had taught her that if she ever faced a lion or a tiger that are notorious in that region, she had to face the lion in the eyes. You see, with lions, when you look at them in the eyes, they see fire in your eyes as a human being. When you look into a lion's eyes, you also see fire, according to Tendai. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I have not had the privilege to face a lion in its eyes. But I had a close encounter about 2 months ago when I visited the country of Zambia. I wanted to experience this lion presence. So, of course, I went for a lion tour, a lion walk for 10 minutes, to which my mother kept screaming and asking where my wheel was, which was very dramatic. But I did enjoy the 10 minutes of the lion walk. There were rules in nature that I was taught by the guides in Zambia. The first one is, with a lion, you cannot stand up above it, because after all, the lion is the king of the jungle. They really understand the sovereignty of their position in the jungle. The second thing is I was taught how to pet them appropriately from behind. You can only touch a certain part of their body when you're petting them, and if you move a little bit differently, things can go really bad very quickly. So with Tendai showing me how she survived the lion by translating her ancestral knowledge in that space, I want you to imagine her. She had the firewood on her head. Probably now it's on her side. And her baby was on her back. And she kept the ancestral wisdom that she had learned from her grandfather. In this very stressful time, she kept looking at the lion. And she explained to me, Sister Comfort, I kept looking at the lion in the face. The lion kept using its paws to pour sand in my face. And I would try to remove the sand. And it kept putting sand. And when I was not able to see the lion directly in its eyes, the lion would then put its claws on my back. So she had a lot of claws. She was clawed on the sides of her back. And as she explained to me, I learned some things about facing giants. I understood the importance of going back and tapping into our ancestral knowledge. I realized that in my 15 years of trying to heal sexual trauma, in my 15 years of serving survivors of torture from war-torn countries, victims of torture and victims of acid attack, all the different kind of women who come through the program I created since 2018, called Pumulani, Minnesota African Women Against Violence, we're kind of probably doing it the wrong way. We're having a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all approach to healing women. I remember having a conversation with our governor in Minnesota and asking him, why do the status of women in Minnesota say black women? There's many shades to blackness. There's the black woman who came as an immigrant. There's the black woman who came as a refugee. There's the black Caribbean sister. There's the black sister whose ancestors were forcefully brought here to the US. There's the black Caribbean sister. There's the Afro-Latina sister. All our needs are different, and they're very unique and peculiar. So my challenge to the governor was around really creating culturally specific services for healing of survivors, culturally healing services for just the people that have historically been marginalized. So back to Tendai's story, and what I came to share with you today is understanding the importance of what we have already in our hands. One of the stories that I was thinking about when I was thinking about what I want to share today is the story of a young man or a young boy called David. David becomes the most popular writer, I think one of the most popular writers in history, where he writes the Psalms. David, before he became king, he was just a boy. But you see, David is known historically for facing a giant, Goliath. One thing I learned from David, as I learned from Tendai about facing a giant, is the power of naming what it is that we want to attack. When we misname things, we don't really get the antidote of healing that thing. David did not call Goliath the giant. He called him an uncircumcised Philistine. I believe in that naming was the power that David understood his position versus Goliath. The second thing I learned is the tools that we have in our hands. I'm also brought to the story of Moses when God was sending him to be a savior for the Israelites. He complained to God about his stutter, but God asked him, what do you have in your hands? What did David have in his hands? David had just bought a piece of elastic. See, he had been practicing shooting birds in the wild, and his big brothers did not have respect for the little piece of elastic. But with that elastic, he toppled a giant. In fact, in the word, it says he slayed the giant. Tendai did not have any tools. I remind her, Tendai, you had some firewood. You could have gotten the firewood. She had ancestral knowledge inside of her to face the lion. And she used her eyes. That was from her ancestors, that knowledge. And so today, I think I want to leave us with this thought process around how I have been on my own healing journey. 15 years, I tried to heal the trauma I experienced as a child. But there were a few things that I realized I couldn't really do for 15 years. I was trying to heal myself outside of myself. I was trying to utilize the tools of the master to heal myself. I think it's Sister Bell Hooks who says, you cannot dismantle the home of the master with the same tools that built them. I realized that there's an importance of going back to our ways of knowing, ways of being, to our ancestral ways that healing was done. What are those for you? Are those rituals that your great-grandmothers used to do? You see, colonization has been in the way, and one of the things I learned about colonization is the demonization of those very tools. Of late, I've been going back. Listening to my traditional music has been soothing to my soul. It's been healing. Going back to the jungle, I've been to the Amazon to reconnect with nature. How many of us are still reconnecting with nature? How much time do we spend in nature? How much time do we spend in the garden, as our mothers used to do? How much time do we cook from scratch? It's things that, like David's little elastic, we might think, maybe they don't matter, but they do matter when it comes to healing. So today I wanted to stop by and just challenge us to think about, what have you been told about your ancestors? Were you told they were evil? Were you told they were demonic? Ancestral worship. Is it really ancestral worship? Or it's acknowledging of your ancestors? See, when my father passed away in 2020 to COVID, I started asking myself, because my father transitioned to the other side, is he now evil? One of my best friends? He can definitely not be evil. I've been questioning a lot about some of the wording. And so I just wanted to bring these tools to us and say, if we really want to see transformation and healing, we must go back to connect the dots from where our ancestors started. To leave you with this question of, who are your people? What is your culture? To move beyond race and think about culture. Because sometimes when we talk about culture, we're only thinking about Black culture, Latina culture, Asian culture. But we all have culture. Even when you're Caucasian, you do have a culture. Who are your people? And what were their practices? What part of those practices can serve you in the present moment? So I'll share some testimony with you. Ever since I started engaging in something called the cultural self-study through one of my mentors, Mother Atum Azhera, with a program called the Cultural Wellness Center. And I hope you can all write notes on this. You have to check out the Cultural Wellness Center. I started doing cultural self-study. I realized some really amazing things about myself. While masquerading as an African child, I realized I was very British in my thinking. I'd been so colonized I was just identifying as an African girl, but my ways were very British. I had to go and decolonize that as my first antidote to healing. I also realized that a lot of the things I've learned about who my people are, about what my culture was, even down to my hair, how my hair grows facing the sun, how the curls curl in the way that they do. All those things I had been told that there was something wrong with them. Now imagine if you think there's everything wrong with you, how then are you supposed to heal and be in love with yourself? So in ending, I'll say, may we all go and do our own cultural self-study, our real authentic cultural self-study that is not tainted. And in the middle of that, we will find true healing. I thank you.